Hopefully it works this time. The loading bar is kind of comical.
And Captain Miles, you want to take it away?
Sure.
We're not 100% yet. Just give me like 10 seconds for it to pop up. I think we are live now. Yes, we are good to go.
Good morning, everyone. Jan Miles, captain with the Pride of Baltimore 2, with Jeff Crosby, chief mate, behind the camera on this October Saturday morning, the 10th of the 10th October. It's a overcast day, pretty low deck, no rain, no forecast of rain, still good balmy temperature, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Captain Miles, what have we been up to this past week?
Well, you've been doing a lot. You're accumulating volunteers for boxes to take home to do work, sort of on an average of maybe 2 a week, right?
Yeah, I've been pretty consistent with that. Been slowly dismantling the boat and handing it to people to take home and refinish in their garages.
Yeah, and you're really deep in the galley area.
Yeah, also, I've been involved in doing some countertop repair in the galley, as well as kind of neatening up some past plumbing and electrical additions and configurations. So that's kept me pretty busy.
So we won't get into what I've been doing.
What have you been doing?
That becomes that's actually the eternal question. What do captains do?
Yeah, right. There's a lot of mystery there.
Well, you and I do a lot of conferring. We're looking at next year. We're looking at next year's crew. We're doing a lot of imagining of what's going to be required. And that's sort of where I fall in. I've been continuing with my monitoring of the status of our cathodic protection, which seems to be less unpredictable and more predictable, but it's still a work in progress. It's been fascinating to watch how small the current changes in the water and how large, by comparison, the changes are in the ship. We'll get a change from, say, 0.25 volts to 0.28 volts as a reference in the water, and we'll see the impact on the inside the ship, whereby the zinc connected to the shaft and the propeller create a current, and we'll get a 0.92 and a 0.93 number. And then as the numbers change from day to day, there can be a dramatic change inside the ship, whereby instead of it, say it's just from baseline of 0.28 down to 0.25, we'll see the inside voltage drop to nearly 0.87. So it's a different metric, and it's a big puzzle. It's always been a mystery to everybody. I go to our favorite expert, and I still don't understand what he says.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're in the weeds with a lot of the data and the numbers.
Yeah. And then we're having conversations with the staff about next year's schedule, partnering up with the National Park Service with regards to the 1812 War Gateway pathway areas all around the bay for Maryland and maybe also in Virginia.
Cool. Yeah. It's kind of exciting to see things starting to take shape for next year, for sure.
Right.
And joining us this morning, we have Captain Peter Boudreau, the lead shipwright for the building of the second Pride of Baltimore. So Peter, do you want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit and give us some background on how you got involved with Pride?
Yeah, thanks for having me, by the way. And hopefully technology will hold up to our rugged use this morning. But I thought a little bit this morning about how things materialized and ended up with me building a second Pride of Baltimore. When you think of it, building a Pride of Baltimore is amazing, and who would have thought that could happen? Building a second one is, double amazing. But I showed up in 1976. I was part of the flotilla of tall ships that visited Baltimore and Inner Harbor. And I walked over and I saw, a bunch of wood and wood chips and some people chopping, and they go, "We're building a Baltimore Clipper." And I knew I had to do that. And it was one of those life changes that you make. And, if you think back on it, you wonder what would have happened if you did not decide at that moment, Anyway, so I became the lowest of the low boat builder, sweeping wood chips and generally fetching stuff and sharpening tools and, holding things. That was a big one. Hold this. So anyway, I was very motivated to be that person who knew how to do stuff and was the best I could be, kind of thing. And I became sort of that. I put that in sort of quotation marks because there were, millions of people better than me, but I became a good shipwright, and we finished the first Pride, and by another one of those bizarre life avenues that you just choose, I got up. It was a normal day, and the current builder and captain came over. He says, "Pete, you seem to be doing pretty well. How about you be captain?" And I go, "Yes, I'll do it." Even though I was not a, super experienced guy, but oddly enough, I had more experience than most of the other folks. And so I started as captain, and the rest of the story is sort of known, but I learned almost everything I know, running that vessel in all types of different conditions. And that young guy in this photo, it's a very lonely job. Apparently I have no crew.
That's the what do you need a crew for?
I don't think people like me very much. So anyway, and today, of course, we have Pride 2, and I guess later there'll be sort of questions about the big differences between the two. I think that's another thing I thought about before coming on here this morning, is that the differences between the two are not just the physical, ballast weight and draft, and those are pretty obvious. But what's fundamental about the two vessels and makes them so different is that the concept in the beginning for the first Pride was pretty vague. If you can picture Baltimore City in the 70s, rebuilding Inner Harbor, they're going to be rejuvenating South Baltimore and the neighborhoods, and they were doing all kinds of stuff, and building a Baltimore Clipper was a no-brainer, so to speak. Mayor Schaefer was like, "Sure, let's do that," but really, the concept was not really, really well thought out in terms of what's this boat going to do and where's it going to go and who's going to maintain it. All of those questions that we know now are huge. Never even came up. It was always like, let's get it built and in that harbor so we can look at it, and before we knew it, we were in the harbor and underway to Bermuda,
which is a bit of a change.
Which a guy could write a book about just that, 7-8 day, adventure. And you could write a book about breaking stuff, the seaman's guide to how to break stuff. And almost everything that we made on Pride, we made ourselves at the Inner Harbor little parking lot where we built the ship. So all the metal, the rigging, you name it, except for the engines and the electronic stuff, we made it. And by golly, we broke it too. Over time, the next few years, we broke almost every single thing that was made, which is a good segue into the Pride 2. The reason the Pride 2 is what she is we broke everything, and Pride 2 has bigger stuff, much bigger stuff in terms of, chain plates and rigging and fittings and eye bolts, and with the small exception, Jan, of one little item that we somehow managed to break again. Almost everything that was bigger has held up over a remarkable number of sea miles and days at sea.
Yes, indeed. That's exactly true. From my perspective, the operator perspective, I'm not the builder, I'm the operator. So it was a bit of a joke between us about when was Jan going to break Peter's boat? I think you brought it up too. We were messing around with improvements to the head rig. You articulated the idea of a bunch of strings getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and then everything was going to just suddenly fly apart. Yeah. So you and I first met when the Pride, and you were mate aboard the Pride, came to Mystic, Connecticut in 1977. And I was the mate of the Bill of Rights. I had been mate aboard the Brilliant, but I had shifted gears after 5 years with her, and I was mate of the Bill of Rights, and you were mate of the Pride in the early part of 1977, summer part of 77, when you came to Mystic. So over the years, we've crossed tracks, mingled quite a bit together during winter of 80-81 and 79-80 and 80-81, when you were in the charter boat trade and I was in the windjammer trade on the American side of the Virgin Islands. And my last real effort to get you back into the fold, because you had gotten into the charter trade, was to get you to come back to Pride when it was being operated by the new nonprofit. And I can remember us spending at least one night, if not 2 nights, Pride at anchor in Charlotte-Amalie, you on your dad's vessel. You were taking a little bit of time from your own charter vessel, and talked into the wee hours of the morning about what was going on with Pride, what was going on with Pride Inc., and you coming back. And from that point on, when you made that decision to come back, Pride never had other than 3 skippers: Armin Assessor, yourself, and myself, for those 6 years from 1980 when Armin went aboard with Pride Inc., and then through 1986 on our way back. So that created a stability that the boat really had not had after you had left her as captain, after Melbourne had been her maiden voyage captain. So what this vessel is, that beneficiary of all that continuity that you bring from the very beginning, and continue to be a consultant when I say help.
Yeah, so it sounds like there is, the experience of sailing and breaking, the original Pride was definitely brought into the construction of the second Pride. What were some other kind of big design changes that needed to be puzzled out between the first Pride of Baltimore and the second?
Well, excuse me. I'll say that if you go back to the sort of fundamental beginning again, if you have a vessel that has no connection to any known standards, Pride 1, she basically was a close replica of an 1812 vessel, is pretty much as close as we could get and still operate. Pride 2, immediately from the very beginning, concept was to be a Coast Guard licensed vessel. And that's huge because it brings with it a lot of limitations to stability and rails and lifelines and bulkheads and pumps and piping, everything. So that plus a fairly dramatic redesign of the underwater part of the vessel, which would be the hull form, the draft, and the addition of substantial outside ballast, lead ballast, make Pride 2 and the difference between the two dramatic, all the way from light breezes up to heavy weather, as Jan will attest. On his, first couple of voyages, he would write me these little notes, and he would, point out, things that he noticed about the newer vessel versus the older vessel, being one of the few people who had sailed both. And it was always exciting for me to, see these notes as he would, come up with the smallest things, like, we sailed in so-and-so knots of wind, and I sent somebody up aloft to check the peak halyard bolt, because that would be, something that had broken in the past, and of course it was gigantic, but we did manage to break that one though on Pride 2, right, Jan?
Yeah. It was only the
broke
middle one. We changed the orientation. It works after that.
And the other big difference in this photo, I think that's Susie Huseman, maybe, one of the surviving crew of the first Pride, came to work on rebuilding the Pride 2. But one of the big things that we wanted to do with Pride 2 was make her hull and everything else very strong, as strong as we could make it. So in terms of the frames were tropical hardwood like the original, but instead of just putting wooden trunnels through them to hold them together, these are bolted together with bronze bolts, and in between the sandwich of the two layers of each frame, around the bronze bolt is a ring, about like a 4-inch diameter ring, and it's inserted between the two pieces as it's put together. And the ring is like a shearing resistor. So every time you look at these photos and you see the little head of a bronze bolt, in fact, there's a 4-inch ring around each of those bolts that basically prevents all of the parts of those frames from moving at all. I mean, it literally is like a solid piece of wood. And on the bottom in this particular photo, you can see where the red lead paint is. In fact, all of those frames are tied to the keel and the ballast and to the next frame next to it by these bronze floors, they call them, putting tremendous strength into that curved down and vertical area where the ballast is. And I think to a large extent, our efforts to make her very strong really succeeded, and remarkably on a budget that by today's standard people would laugh at. They would go, "You're not going to build that for 1.5 million bucks. You know, you can't even buy the tools for that job with that, you know." And here we built a whole ship, and we got sails, rigging, pots and pans, cushions for the saloon, you know, and we got everything included. And it is amazing. None of us made any money, but it was definitely a one-of-a-kind kind of operation. And when you think of the size of that parking lot that she was built in the inner harbor, that everything that went into that ship was made right there in that little space. And it was our happy home for a couple of years, really. And it's the same, almost the same exact spot where Pride 1 was built and launched from.
That's pretty remarkable. Taking a look at some of these photos, these are some pretty big tropical timbers. How did you source where to get that?
Well, I didn't think of it on my own. I know from working on Pride 1 that all of her timber came from Belize, and I knew I had experience working with that wood, and I knew one thing for sure. I knew that if you put the right kind of wood in the right place, you were not going to get rot. It's not going to rot. So I made I think like 3 trips down there. I met with some lumber people. I showed them pictures and I said, "This is what I want, and here are the sizes." I actually gave them like pencil drawings of the piece of wood with the width, the depth, the length, and then the species of wood. And I said, "This is what I want." And they go, "Oh, it's going to be hard to get that." And I said, "Okay, this is what I want. You got to get it, bring it to the port, put it in a container, and ship it to Baltimore." And that's what they did. Not without some crazy snafus, but that's basically how we got really, really great pieces of wood. And it was not as expensive as it would be for me to source the wood in the US. So it wasn't an expensive thing. It was just a longevity question.
Yeah. Can you kind of describe some of the wood choices that went into Pride's construction?
Sure. Well, if you think of it kind of like a, dinosaur skeleton, let's say that all of the ribs and bone parts, the structural parts, were all tropical, and all of the sheathing or the planking parts were from the US, like Pacific Northwest Douglas fir, Maryland white oak, and yeah, some spruce and stuff, but mostly Douglas fir. And in this picture, you can see somebody's walking on what will become the keelson, and that is a piece of Cortez, which if you put it in the water, it'll go straight to the bottom. It is hard as rock and bulletproof. The frames or ribs that you can see are Santa Maria, which is almost like a mahogany-like wood, but harder. And the bottom part of the frame, where it goes through next to the keel and up the other side, that part is a kind of wood called bullet wood, which is very hard and very durable. And I have some pieces in my basement that are cut in odd shapes that if they're a piece of oak, they would have cracked in half years ago. And they just haven't moved at all. And the keel itself is a piece of Cortez, two pieces of Cortez. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of years it's going to last, but even long after the boat is gone and that piece of wood is laying on the bottom of the Baltimore Harbor somewhere, it will still be almost like new. I mean, the wood is that durable. It's incredible.
What's it like working with that type of wood? I can't imagine it's pleasant.
It isn't. And in fact, part of the reason it's so durable is that some of that wood has natural toxins in it, grows in swamps or wet areas, and critters, bugs, rot, whatever tries to grow on these pieces of wood. And in millions of years, they've evolved to protect themselves. So they have natural toxins against rot and bugs. And if you are sawing it 24 hours a day like we were, and dust all over the place, yeah, there were you could get a rash from the sawdust. And we did our best to do the respirator stuff, but in the beginning we didn't know about the skin issue, but we found out quickly that, yeah, you got to have like those white disposable suits when you're doing a lot of dust work with Cortez. Some of the other stuff, it didn't really matter too much. It was not much different than using mahogany or something like that.
What were some more some of the more challenging aspects of the building of Pride 2 due to like her design or size or things of that nature?
Well, I will say that when we got the gang together to build that vessel, we had just finished building Lady Maryland, the Pungy schooner, So a large part of that crew came from Pride 1. They were retired crew members, now living a rich life as a carpenter. So anyway, they were part of the Pride team, if you want to, Pride family, I think Gail Shaw used to say. They were part of the Pride family. So we were happily building along, and then the disaster happened with Pride 1, and then Pride 2 came along. So we had this family connection. And by the way, we had 2 or 3 the people who survived Pride 1, the sinking of Pride 1, working on Pride 2 for a long time. I mean, they were building with great enthusiasm. So our enthusiasm and the feeling of being connected was huge. It was a big part of our team, so to speak. And consequently, we were a little bit removed from reality. Reality being, this vessel is being built as a U.S. Coast Guard inspected vessel to X standards, and we got to produce so that in the end, it becomes certified. If you don't do things the way they're supposed to be done, it's not going to get certified. So I think we went along with a sort of sense of entitlement for a while, that we were like, well, we don't need to listen to those people. We get to do what we want, But reality is that it was very hard to turn the train around, and it included everybody. It included the management in Baltimore and the designer. And I won't say it included Jan, because I think he was one of the people pulling the bow line of the train around. But it had to be brought into line with what the end of the story was going to be. And I don't know if I'm describing this properly. Maybe I'm just messing it up, but we had a very entitled sense of how this boat was going to get built, and we were doing a great job, and if somebody didn't like it, they were dumb. And really what needed to happen is that everybody needed to do what they're told, and I mean everybody, and we needed to pull it together and finish it on time, so that Jan could come in and begin his program. And I must say that somehow we did that, and it was a first experience for all of us, really. The whole Coast Guard regulation inspection thing. Although Lady Maryland was inspected, but this was different because Pride was going to be an ocean-going vessel. Even Helen Bentley was involved in one way or the other, getting Coast Guard to, listen to my pleas about watertight bulkheads and the kind of doors, and then the voltage it took to run a hydraulic door, and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, it was a family of people. And I think that it's probably still is that way, but it's different because now there's only one person left sailing Pride who ever had anything to do with Pride 1. That guy down to the right there.
So kind of during the building process of the second Pride, as you mentioned before, there was a kind of a lot of changes that were being implemented because of experience with the first Pride. Did you and Jan ever clash when it came to like different ideas of how to do something and how to make the boat a little more efficient or sail better or whatever it may be?
No, we never did. And I'll tell you why, is that I think Jan is one of those people who can get what he wants by doing it to you without you even knowing what's happening. So I make a joke of that, but we never clashed over anything, and we did have lots of in-depth discussions. A good example would be the tiller and the wheel. And this actually comes with a free story attached to it. But when I was in Galveston, Texas on Pride 1, we were just so out of control with where we had to go and who picked the places, and did they even check the depth, or overhead power cables, or bridges that don't open. Who's checking that stuff? So anyway, I ended up in this little river up in Seabrook, Texas, I think. And I had to go through a lift bridge, which almost touched the rigging. I mean, it was just like way too small. So I get up there and we're leaving the dock, and to get Pride 1 to do anything, it was like full astern, full ahead, which even then wasn't enough. But anyway, so I'm full astern leaving this little fuel dock up there, and she finally gets going and gets about 2/3 of the way out of the slip, and the stern goes aground on the other bank. Me standing back aft, the tiller swept the deck and caught me right here and put me up against the bulwarks, and I could look over. Jan will know exactly where that control for the engine is, but it's way up the side, maybe 15 feet away. So I was there with the tiller underneath my throat and looking over at the engine control, which happens to be going full astern. And I'm saying, God, this tiller in reverse with a motorized vessel is totally different from a vessel that is only powered by sail. So we had a good discussion about changing the tiller to a wheel, especially with two engines that would be even more power. When you go reverse, the tiller becomes a lethal weapon.
I would tell that story a lot differently, Peter. I recall talking about learning from Tom Gilmer, that the eccentric griping performance of the hull under sail that the old Pride had versus the second Pride would have meant that there'd be somewhat increase in the neutrality or the balance of the hull, a less weather helm. And I was thinking, holy crow, we'd have to have double tackles, because one of the accommodations of the first boat with a tiller was we only needed one tackle because she always had weather helm. And if you let go, that tiller would just go to leeward. And with more balance in the newer hull, it was like, oh my goodness, we're going to have two tackles or two people or something. And of course, with those twin screws under power, that would be also an issue, just trying to work against the thrust of one propeller when both are running, but one is on one side, one's the other. When you try to turn it, So anyway, that was an interesting conversation, and it got resolved in a sort of a silly fashion. There was a little bit of a conversation with Coast Guard about the tiller and the versus the wheel, and in the end they said, well, okay, if you go with a tiller, we may have to add a person to the minimum manning on a single watch, and that became economical. And that's my recall as to the overall decision to accept what was a horrifying idea, at least emotionally, but to accept the reality of, well, we don't want to keep adding crew to this boat, so we'll go to the wheel. And in our experience with the wheel, it's been really a great device for inclusion. So anybody that comes aboard the boat can take a turn at the wheel because it's pretty straightforward to handle. And it doesn't sweep the deck, as your story tells. We can actually get people pretty close to the stern near the helm without worrying about the big stick knocking somebody down or being in the way, just virtually running, just merely in the process of managing the boat. So yeah, the tiller, we'd love to have sailed there that way for a little while, but the wheel works very, very well for everybody. Big wheel, you can have people who stand shorter than the top of that wheel and they still have the physical power to steer the vessel even when she's roaring along at 10 knots. We used to have trouble with the old Pride. You get roaring along at 9 knots and it was hard for one person with one tackle. We'd have to reverse the tackle and make 4 parts or 3 parts rather than 2 parts in order to have the strength, the power to steer it. So anyway, yeah, it's I'm meandering. Sorry, folks.
That's all good. So what was the timeline of the build of the second Pride? How long did it take?
I think we're talking a year and a half or 2 years. But we wanted to keep the cost and the time the cost as small as possible and the time as quick as possible. The reason being that, as a lot of people that run projects know, is if you have time, people will fill it. And if you let the project creep, it will. And the best way to prevent any of that from happening is to just get it all done as quickly as possible and within the cost that you can afford to pay. And I think, give or take, I mean, there's months of stuff that end up needing to be done, but was done after she was basically fully commissioned. But to the large part, I think we did that. So about a year and a half, I think. Jan, you can correct me, but I think that's what it was.
Yeah, so the loss was in just before the beginning of the summer. It was, and then there was design time, and I think you laid a keel before the turn of the year or just after the turn of the year, and then launching came a year later, and then there was finishing up. So yeah, that 2-year window from the loss to the commissioning, a little bit better than a 2-year window overall. So there was conversation about choosing to decide to build, and then there was the design, and of course pulling together the material, and then you actually got into it. I guess it was actually early of 87, and then launching was early 88, and then all the builders trials after the rig up, and then the handover to the company in October. Yeah.
So here's a pretty good photo of the launching of Pride. What was kind of just the general atmosphere and kind of your own personal reflection on that occasion?
Well, you're always nervous that, I mean, if anything happens, it wouldn't be small, put it that way, right? I mean, it's one of those things that it's simple enough unless something goes wrong. And I must say that part of my confidence in what was going on there is the crane that we had used was I think Bethlehem Steel, and we had used that crane to launch Pride 1, Lady Maryland, and now Pride 2. The crane is called Big Red. I don't think it's around anymore, but it was primarily used for building bridges, and it was pretty huge. I mean, it made lifting the Pride look like it was picking up a small overnight bag to go, you know, I mean, it really is a big, big piece of equipment. So that's inspires confidence. And the rigging, if you look at it carefully, you can see that those yellow spreaders were made specifically for lifting the Pride, and the shackles and the wire connections, everything that is underneath that bridle was made up specifically to lift the Pride. So the lengths are perfect, everything's just right. And the whole thing was provided free. You know, as a sort of salute to the new vessel and to Baltimore City. And interestingly about this photo is I had meetings with the crane operator like several days before, and he said, no balloons. Geez, I said, boy, I don't know how I can control that. I mean, there literally was thousands of people there. So how do you end up with no balloons? He goes, I just don't want to see any balloons. What happens apparently is they get the balloons popping and they end up in the sheave or the turning wheel at the top of the crane, and it gets in there, and it actually, the thickness of a balloon can degrade the lifting power of the wire. So I said, really? But anyway, I said, no, there won't be any balloons there.
Yeah.
That picture right there shows you sort of what the little shipyard looks like without the ship in it. But if you look at it, it's the sort of dirt, the brown dirt area. And we actually built a couple of little buildings to help us, you know, the building process. But if you picture that spot and then picture the ship in it, there's really almost nothing left. I mean, it's a very tight, small area. And I'm still amazed today at what we were able to do in a downtown area next to Harbor Place that, you know, well, I don't think they let you do it now because, you know, I remember they used to call us from Phillips Restaurant and saying, no, this is ridiculous. We got wood chips in our soup, you know. It's like, no, it's not us.
That's the other boat that's being built.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like building the boat in such a public location? I mean, you know, that's
interesting and not easy. I will say that our little band of carpenters had plenty of experience with that in that very spot. When you think of it, that we had done Pride 1, Lady Maryland, and Pride 2, but we also did all of the years that the Pride had large refits done, was done in that spot. And so we knew all the comings and goings of all the characters in Baltimore. There was a guy who, I don't know, maybe Jan might know who this is, but there was a guy, his name was Sweet Peaches. And he was an older gentleman. He used to wear white gloves, and he'd walk like this down the Harbor Place. And he always had a sign of something, like a little sign. And he was great friends with the crew on the Pride, you know, and he would come down and talk to us and whatever. And one day the Pride was tied up at the Finger Piers, and Mayor Schaefer was coming down to say something or announce something. And Peaches was there on the dock, and the crew was on the deck, and they couldn't see what Peaches was doing. And Schaefer shows up, and Schaefer's like not thrilled. We are not amused. And turns out Peaches had a sign for us, right? This was to help the Pride crew. Dear Mayor Schaefer, we are people, not dogs. He was one of those characters, you know, and he was always up to something. But you get, you know, if you're there long enough, you see everything. I mean, it's a kind of a wild place.
Yeah, the whole thing is a pretty remarkable story. We do have one question in from the Facebook feed, and this would be for both Jan and Pete. What's the favorite place that you've traveled on Pride or Pride 2?
You go first, Peter.
Well, it's easy for me, and I must say, incredibly lucky. I think the management and Jan and, you know, everybody kind of allowed me to do this more than it was a great necessity to the city. But I think it was along the way of the main voyage, so I was allowed to do it. But on Pride 1, I made a stop in St. Lucia in Marigot Bay, where I grew up as a kid. And I saw the people that I grew up with, the local folks, and the people in their native canoes, and they go, "Peter, how are you, my friend?" You know, like this. And so I did it on Pride 1, and was incredibly lucky to do it again on Pride 2. And we did make a valiant effort to meet with the head of tourism, whatever the ministers and stuff that we were supposed to meet with. Couldn't go on a day sail with us, but we did do a day sail, and we were able to make that stop. And it was, to me, magical, because it brought back all the memories from my childhood days. So that was by far the best place I went.
So talk about the photograph, Peter.
Well, that is a Herreshoff schooner that my dad owned. She's now called Mariette. She was built in 1915. And we owned her for many years, chartering in the Caribbean at a time when there were only half a dozen big yachts chartering down there. My dad was a real one of those leftover old-time schooner men from Nova Scotia, and he bought her, and we went to St. Lucia and created a life, a house. He actually ended up building a hotel there too, but his love was sailing the schooners, and we went up and down the chain of islands in that vessel more times than I can count. And now she sails with a owner who can afford to keep her up in a manner that is, you know, tip-top Bristol fashion.
So my favorite landfall visit is, it won't come as a surprise to anybody, is Baltimore, Ireland. So I discovered Baltimore, Ireland through a direct approach taken by a citizen of Baltimore, Ireland, who came over to the office specifically ahead of the 1985 Europe trip for the first Pride, because we were en route to represent Baltimore and in Europe via Cork, Ireland. And Cork, Ireland was celebrating 800 years. And so en route, we were going from Chesapeake Bay through Bermuda, through the Azores, on the way to Cork. And this citizen from Baltimore, Ireland came and said, I am the Commodore of the Baltimore Yacht Club. And if you have a chance to pay a visit, it's on the way. It's on the way. You won't have to deviate. And my caution was, well, I don't know if we want to saddle ourselves with this responsibility. It's another stop. The crew are going to be in demand all the time. So I sort of said, okay, I mean, if you visit Ireland, you speak to Irish folks who want to celebrate their area, they are so beguiling. So we wound up so far ahead of schedule that I surprised those folks, the O'Flynn's and everybody in Baltimore, with a very early landfall. We wound up spending 10 days in Baltimore, Ireland before our obligation in Cork. And it was a most fundamental founding of friendship and alignment ever. The hospitality was stunning. There wasn't much sleeping going on for 10 days. And we've gone back with the second vessel numerous times. Every time we've gone to Europe, either upon arrival in Europe, having crossed the Atlantic, or on the way out. In one occasion during the summer, we've always paid a respectful call to Baltimore, Ireland. There is no relationship between Baltimore, Ireland and Baltimore, Maryland. It's just nearly a coincidence of familiar names. There is some linkage to a royalty connection whereby someone got a name given to them by the king, some reference, lordship kind of thing. But other than that, there's no relationship. And of course, Baltimore, Ireland goes way, 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 way back. They can talk about being pirated by Africans coming up the coast from Spain or from Spain. We, of course, don't have anything like that to be able to identify with. But to go somewhere and be welcomed, Baltimore takes the cake in my experience. Baltimore, Ireland takes the cake. Yeah, that's been a wonderful legacy to be a part of.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you, Pete, for joining us this morning and sharing these awesome stories. What a great story the building of the Second Pride is, and your perspective is really cool to hear. And I want to thank you for those of you that donated this morning. That helps keep these episodes going. And for those of you that have been following us on social media, you may be aware of the Galveston Tall Ships Throwdown that's happening. This afternoon at 3 o'clock, there is the final event to tune into, and you can get there by going on our Facebook and clicking through links, or just going to Galveston Historical Society's website. It's all right there. And Captain Miles, do you have any parting words for us this morning?
As always, stay diligent, everyone. Stay diligent.